Have you ever watched a marriage fall apart and wondered what went wrong? Not from the outside, not the arguments you saw or the silence you heard through the walls, but the real thing, the invisible thing, the thing that started breaking years before anyone noticed. Padre Pio saw that thing. He saw it clearly. And what he said about it is one of the most honest, most uncomfortable, most needed things any man of God has ever said about marriage and the family. This is not a story about divorce statistics or relationship tips. This is a story about what Padre Pio actually witnessed in the confessional, in private conversations, in visions he received at the Friary of Our Lady of Grace in San Giovanni Rotondo in the Gargano Mountains of southern Italy. This man spent over 50 years hearing the deepest secrets of human hearts. He heard things that would destroy most people, and again, the same wound kept showing up. Not in the big dramatic sins, in the quiet, daily removal of God from the center of a home. He said once, in a conversation recorded by his spiritual daughter Cleonice Morcaldi, who documented years of her interactions with him in the book published after her death, he said, "A home without God is a house that is standing on sand. You can paint it, furnish it, and fill it with children, and it will still fall." Morcaldi asked him when it starts falling. He said, "When the couple stops praying together, that is the first crack." If you have ever been in a marriage or watched someone else's, you know exactly what he means. If this kind of deep, documented testimony from the life of Padre Pio matters to you, subscribe right now. It is the best way to support this work and make sure you never miss a story like this one. Also, drop a comment and tell us what city you are watching from. We love knowing who is out there. This script is researched and factual, drawing primarily from two serious sources. Cleonice Morcaldi's direct testimony compiled in her Italian-language memoir, La mia vita vicino a Padre Pio, first published in 1978, which contains over 3 decades of recorded conversations with the friar, and from the critical biography by Bernard Ruffin, Padre Pio, The True Story, revised edition from 1991, which cross-references eyewitness accounts with medical and ecclesiastical records. These are not secondhand summaries, these are primary sources. Now back to the story. Padre Pio was born on May 25, 1887 in Pietrelcina, a small hilltop village in the province of Benevento in the Campania region of Italy. His parents were Grazio Forgione and Maria Giuseppa D'Annunzio, simple farming people, deeply Catholic. They prayed the rosary every night as a family, not occasionally, not when things were hard, every single night. Padre Pio said many times that this was the foundation of everything that came later. He credited his vocation to the atmosphere of that house. Prayer was not something they did. Prayer was the air they breathed inside those walls. He entered the Capuchin order at 15 years old in January of 1903 at the Friary of Morcone. He was ordained a priest on August 10, 1910, in the Cathedral of Benevento. From that day forward, he was at war with something most people cannot even see: the spiritual destruction happening inside Christian families, who had quietly stopped acting like Christian families. The first time he spoke publicly about marriage without God at its center was in a documented sermon delivered at San Giovanni Rotondo in 1922. The text was preserved by Padre Alberto da Palto, one of his fellow Capuchins, who kept detailed notes of Padre Pio's pastoral instructions. In that sermon, Padre Pio said something that made the congregation go silent. He said, "I have seen many sick marriages in this confessional, and almost never is the sickness new. The couple usually comes to me after 10 years of suffering, but if you go back and look, the God-shaped hole in that marriage was there from the very first year." 10 years. He said that over and over. Most marriages that collapse do not collapse suddenly. They collapse slowly, and the rot starts early. He was not speaking in abstract theology. He was speaking from what he heard. Between 1918, when he first received the visible stigmata, the wounds of Christ on his hands, feet, and side, and 1968, when he died, Padre Pio spent between 8 and 10 hours per day in the confessional. Some accounts from the late 1930s put it at 12 hours on certain Saturdays. 12 hours. Sitting in a small wooden box in the Church of Our Lady of Grace, listening, absolving, advising, sometimes refusing, sometimes weeping. Conservative estimates suggest he heard the confessions of between 100,000 and 300,000 people over 5 decades. You do not spend that kind of time with human suffering without seeing patterns, and the pattern he saw in marriages was always the same. Always cold, empty, predictable. A couple stops praying together, then they stop talking honestly, then they stop forgiving quickly. Then one of them starts resenting. Then the resentment becomes the weather of the house, and the children grow up inside that weather like plants in a room with no windows. Father Agostino Daniele, one of Padre Pio's closest spiritual directors between 1905 and 1931, their correspondence fills over 200 letters, wrote in one of his personal notes that Padre Pio once described to him a vision he had received about a particular family. Padre Pio did not name the family. but he described what he saw. He said he saw a table in a dining room. The family was eating in complete silence. The father was reading a newspaper. The mother was staring at nothing. 3 children sat like stones. And above the table, he said, there was nothing. No light, no presence, just a thick, cold darkness pressing down from the ceiling. He said to Father Agostino, the family had not prayed together in 4 years. 4 years. And the darkness had already settled in like it owned the place. 4 years. Not 40. 4. This is where Padre Pio's teaching gets specific in a way that is hard to dismiss. He was not saying that bad things happen to bad people. He was saying something far more surgical. He was saying that grace, actual supernatural grace, is meant to flow through a marriage like water through a pipe. The sacrament of matrimony, he explained to his spiritual children repeatedly, is not just a ceremony. It is a living channel. And like any channel, it requires maintenance. The maintenance is prayer. Joint prayer. The rosary prayed together, the morning offering made together, Mass attended together, grace said before meals. These are not traditions. These are the valves. When you close them, the water stops. When the water stops, the pipe dries out. When the pipe dries out, it cracks. He said this in different ways to different people across different decades. But the message was always the same. The sacrament does not maintain itself. The couple is the sacrament. And if the couple stops cooperating with grace, the channel closes. Maria Pio was an American convert who moved to San Giovanni Rotondo in 1923 to be near Padre Pio. She stayed until her death in 1968. She served as his English language translator for decades and had direct access to his pastoral conversations. In a letter to her friend in New York in 1935, the letter is archived at the Casa Sollievo della Sofferenza, the hospital Padre Pio founded in San Giovanni Rotondo. She describes a conversation she witnessed between Padre Pio and a married woman who had come asking for advice about her failing marriage. The woman told Padre Pio that she and her husband had grown apart, that they felt like strangers, that there was no warmth left. She asked him what to do. Padre Pio was quiet for a moment. Then he asked her one question. He said, "When did you last pray together?" The woman looked confused and then said she could not remember. Padre Pio nodded slowly. He said, "That is when your marriage began to die." The woman was stunned. She had expected him to ask about arguments, betrayals, financial pressure. He went straight to the prayer, because for Padre Pio, that was the tell. That was always the tell. He then gave her something practical. He told her to go home that evening and ask her husband, not to change, not to apologize, not to have a long conversation, but simply to kneel with her for 5 minutes and say one Our Father and one Hail Mary together before bed. Just that. Just 5 minutes. He said, if he says yes, there is still a door open. If he refuses even that, you will know exactly how far the distance has grown. The woman went home. She came back to San Giovanni Rotondo 1 month later. She reported to Maria Pio, who wrote it all down in the letter, that her husband had agreed on the first night. Uncomfortable, awkward, embarrassed, but he had knelt, and on the second night, and on the third. And that within 2 weeks they had begun talking again, really talking. Not about logistics or schedules, but about things that actually mattered. About fear, about loneliness, about God. Maria Pio wrote, Father said the prayer had reopened the pipe. He was not surprised at all. But Padre Pio also saw the other side. The side where no one knelt. The side where the offer was refused. In 1947, a man from Naples came to San Giovanni Rotondo. He had traveled over 300 kilometers by train and on foot to see Padre Pio. He told the friar that his marriage was destroyed. His wife had left him. His children were divided. His home was sold. He was asking Padre Pio to explain to him why God had allowed this to happen. He was not asking in a humble way. He was demanding. He was angry. Padre Pio listened to him without interrupting, and he said something that the man reportedly did not expect and did not want to hear. Padre Pio said, God did not destroy your marriage. You handed it over piece by piece, year by year, to something that was never God. The man started to defend himself. Padre Pio held up his hand, the hand with the wound, and said quietly, Did you pray together? Did you take her to Mass? Did you bring your children to the sacraments? Did you have a crucifix in your bedroom, or did you take it down because it made you uncomfortable? The man went silent. Then he started to cry. He did not answer the questions. He did not need to. This account was documented by Padre Alessio Parente, a Capuchin friar who served at San Giovanni Rotondo beginning in the 1960s and was one of the primary collectors of testimonies about Padre Pio's pastoral work. His collection of documented encounters was published in Italian in 1986 under the title Send Me Your Guardian Angel, though this specific case appears in the supplemental notes of the 1993 Italian edition. Parente was careful to verify his accounts and cross-reference multiple witnesses before publishing. Crucifix in the bedroom. That is a detail that shows up more than once in Padre Pio's documented advice about marriage. Not as superstition, as a sign of intent. He told one couple in the 1950s that the objects in a home tell the truth about what the family worships. A crucifix hanging above a bed is a couple saying, every night before sleep, that what happens in this bed is under the gaze of God. It is a declaration. He said, some couples take it down because they are embarrassed by it. They are embarrassed by Christ. And then they wonder why they feel alone. Silence, wait, cold. He saw the damage most acutely in what happened to children raised in those homes. This was the part that broke him, not the couple's suffering. Adults make choices and bear consequences. The children who grew up in homes where God was an occasional guest instead of the permanent head of the household. He described them once in a conversation recorded by his confessor and biographer, Father Gerardo di Flumeri, as walking around with a hole in their chest that they spend their entire adult lives trying to fill with the wrong things. Di Flumeri's notes from this conversation were dated March of 1958. Padre Pio said, children absorb the spiritual temperature of the home the way dry wood absorbs moisture. If the home is full of prayer, the child grows with prayer as natural as breathing. If the home is empty of prayer, the child grows with an emptiness they cannot name. And when they become adults and feel that emptiness, that gnawing, restless, never-satisfied hunger, they do not know to call it spiritual because no one ever taught them what the spiritual felt like. So they chase money or pleasure or recognition or substances, looking for something to fill a shape they cannot even describe. He said, I have seen this wound so many times, in so many adults, and every time I trace it back, I find a home where the rosary was not prayed. Every time. This is not anecdote, this is pattern. This is 50 years of data collected in a wooden confessional box in a mountain village in southern Italy by a man who could see things most people cannot. If you are still with us, and clearly you are because you understand that this kind of testimony is rare and worth your full attention, subscribe to this channel right now if you have not already. Tell us in the comments what city you're watching from. We read every single one. This research draws also from the testimony of Father Joseph Pius Martin, an American Capuchin who lived and served at San Giovanni Rotondo from 1960 through 1968, the last 8 years of Padre Pio's life. Father Joseph Pius gave extensive oral testimonies recorded on tape in 1972, transcribed and archived by the Capuchin friars of the province of Our Lady of Grace. These tapes have been referenced by multiple serious Padre Pio scholars, including Ruffin, as among the most reliable primary sources for Padre Pio's spoken pastoral advice. Now back. Father Joseph Pius described a specific kind of person who came to Padre Pio regularly, couples who had drifted, not couples who had committed great sins against each other, just couples who had slowly, quietly, without drama or declaration, let God slide out of the center of their lives. And Padre Pio could tell, almost immediately, without being told. Father Joseph Pius said that Padre Pio would sometimes ask a couple who came to him for a blessing, before they had said a word about their situation, how long since you prayed the rosary together? And the look on their faces would answer before their mouths did. He was not being harsh with them. That is important to understand. He was being a surgeon. A surgeon who has seen this infection 1,000 times knows exactly where to press to find the tender spot. Padre Pio pressed there because that was the diagnosis. And the diagnosis, given honestly, is the first act of mercy. There is a documented case from 1954 involving a couple from Rome. Their names have never been published to protect their descendants, but the account was preserved in the pastoral archives of the friary at San Giovanni Rotondo and summarized in a 1995 article by Italian Catholic historian Michele Donadio in the journal Studi Piociani, which focuses exclusively on academic research about Padre Pio's life and ministry. The couple had been married for 20 years. They had 4 children. From the outside, the marriage looked intact, stable, Catholic enough. They attended Mass on Sundays. They had not committed any publicly known grave sins against each other, but inside the home, God had been reduced to a formality. Mass on Sunday was a social obligation, not worship. Grace before meals had stopped years ago. The rosary had not been prayed since their youngest child was born in 1946. The crucifix was still on the wall, but no one looked at it. And the couple had developed the particular coldness that comes not from hatred, but from indifference. They were not enemies. They were strangers wearing rings. They came to Padre Pio because their eldest daughter, then 19 years old, had announced she no longer believed in God and no longer intended to attend Mass or receive the sacraments. The parents were horrified. They wanted Padre Pio to help them save their daughter's faith. Padre Pio heard them out. Then he said, "Your daughter did not lose her faith. She lost access to what faith looks like when it lives inside a home. She saw faith as a rule, not as a relationship. She saw it as something her parents obeyed out of habit on Sunday mornings and then forgot by Sunday afternoon." The mother started to say something. Padre Pio continued quietly. She did not choose to leave God. She was raised in a house where God had already been gently, politely, very carefully asked to wait outside. The silence after that, according to the archived account, lasted over a minute. He did not stop there. He told them what to do. He said that recovering a child's faith rarely begins with the child. It begins with the parents. He told them to begin praying the rosary together that same evening when they returned home. He told them to place the image of Our Lady in the common room and say 1 decade of the rosary before dinner every single night. He told the father to begin attending daily Mass, if at all possible, and if not daily, then at minimum 3 times per week. He told them to stop treating the faith as a Sunday obligation and start treating it as the oxygen of the household. He said, "Your daughter's watching you. She's always been watching you. She will not come back to faith because you tell her to. She will come back because she sees something in you that she wants." The couple followed his instructions. The daughter's story, whether she returned, was not documented in the 1995 article. Donadio noted that the pastoral archives do not always include outcomes, only encounters. What was recorded was the instruction, and the instruction is what matters here, because it is consistent with everything Padre Pio said for 50 years on this exact subject. Consistent. 50 years. Same message. The home is the first church. The father is the first priest. The mother is the first teacher of prayer. The children are the first congregation. When the father abandons his priesthood, not his vocation to ordained ministry, but his vocation to lead his household in worship, the whole structure loses its axis. Padre Pio said this to countless men who came to him. He said it without softening it. He said, "You will answer to God for the souls in your house, not only for the food on the table and the roof over their heads, for their souls. Are you preparing them? Are you leading them? Or are you leaving that to your wife alone and calling yourself a good husband because you did not beat her?" Hard, direct, no apology. He said this in an era when most Italian Catholic men considered religious practice a feminine matter. Going to Mass was for women. The rosary was for old ladies. Men worked, men provided. Men were present in body and absent in spirit. Padre Pio had no patience for this. He called it a lie dressed up as masculinity. He said to one man in the confessional, the account appears in Ruffin's biography, sourced to a deposition given by the man's son decades later, "You think being a man means not needing God. You have it exactly backwards. The man who does not kneel before God will eventually kneel before something much worse. He saw what those homes produced, not immediately, not in 5 years, but in 20 years, in 30 years, in the generation that followed. He saw the adult children of spiritually empty homes coming to him broken, addicted, faithless, divorced themselves, violent, hopeless. Not because God had abandoned them, because no one had ever introduced them. There was a woman. Her account was given directly to Father Alessio Parente in the 1970s, and she gave permission for it to be used in pastoral formation, though not in publication during her lifetime, who came to Padre Pio in the early 1960s with a question about her adult son. The son was 31 years old and had never been to confession as an adult. He had married outside the church, he was drinking heavily, he was cruel to his own children. She was devastated. She asked Padre Pio what she'd done wrong. Padre Pio asked her one question. He said, "Did your husband pray with you when your son was small?" She said no. Her husband had refused. She had tried to take the children to Mass, to teach them the rosary, but her husband had mocked it, had called it weakness, had told the children that religion was for people who were afraid of life. Padre Pio was quiet for a long moment. Then he said to her, "Your son absorbed his father's contempt, not his faith. A child does not learn to love God from a mother's instruction when a father's contempt fills the room. The contempt is louder. Always. The contempt is louder. Always." That is one of the most devastating things Padre Pio ever said about family life. And it is the kind of thing that only gets said by someone who has seen the evidence pile up over 5 decades. He was not speculating. He was reporting. But Padre Pio was also not a man of despair. This is crucial to understand. He did not tell people that the damage was permanent. He did not tell mothers that their children were lost because their husbands had failed. He told them to pray as if everything depended on God, because it did, and to act as if everything depended on them, because it did too. He told that woman with the troubled son to pray the rosary every day for him, specifically for him, naming him in every decade, and to never stop. He said, "Heaven keeps count of every prayer a mother says for her child. Not one is wasted. Not one is wasted." He told her something else that she apparently repeated to many people afterward, because it appears in multiple separate accounts from San Giovanni Rotondo from the 1960s. He said, "It is never too late for a soul as long as it is still breathing. Your son is 31. He has decades ahead of him. Do not bury him while he is still alive. Pray him back. Pray him back." That phrase circulated among the women of San Giovanni Rotondo and beyond. Mothers of wayward children, wives of cold husbands, grandmothers of grandchildren who had left the faith. Pray them back. Padre Pio believed in the power of intercessory prayer for families with a ferocity that matched his belief in anything. He said once that the prayer of a faithful spouse for a faithless one was one of the most powerful prayers in existence, because it is not just petition. It is witness. It is the living proof offered daily before God that a covenant was made and has not been broken. In 1966, 2 years before his death on September 23, 1968, Padre Pio gave what many of his spiritual children considered one of his most direct and sober talks about the state of the Christian family. It was not a formal sermon. It was a conversation in the sacristy after Mass, witnessed by several friars and lay people, including Cleonice Morcaldi, who was present at San Giovanni Rotondo that morning and who recorded what she heard in her memoir. Padre Pio said, and these are her words, paraphrasing him, not a direct transcription, that he had watched over 50 years as the Christian family in Italy and across the world had made a slow and almost unconscious trade. The trade was this: comfort for sacrifice. Modern life had made it easier to be comfortable and harder to be faithful. The family that once prayed together because the evening had nothing else to offer now had 100 distractions filling every moment. The television, the radio, the newspaper, the cafe. He said the distractions were not evil in themselves, but they had become the new liturgy, the new common ritual of the household, gathered around the television instead of gathered around the rosary, present in body and absent in soul. And the children, he said again, absorbed it all. They learned what the family worshipped by watching what the family chose when it had a free hour. When they chose the television over the rosary, the child learned. When they chose silence over prayer, the child learned. When they chose sleep over Sunday Mass, the child learned. Not from instruction, from observation. He said in that same conversation, I'm not afraid of the world outside. I'm afraid of the world that has been allowed inside the Christian home. A wolf does not need to break down the door if the family has already invited him in and given him a chair. A wolf does not need to break down the door. Morcaldi wrote that when he said that, the room was completely silent. No one moved. The friars did not even look at each other, because they all knew he was right. They had all seen it. He had seen it more than any of them. The friary of Our Lady of Grace in San Giovanni Rotondo still stands. The church where Padre Pio heard confessions for 50 years is still open. The confessional, the original wooden box where he sat for 8, 10, 12 hours a day, is preserved. It is small. Smaller than most people expect when they see it for the first time. The wood is dark from decades of use. The screen between confessor and penitent is worn smooth where thousands of hands rested against it. On the floor in front of the kneeler, the stone is slightly hollowed, worn down by the weight of knees, the weight of guilt, the weight of people who came from 300 kilometers away because they did not know where else to go. Thousands of those people were couples. Thousands of them were parents. Thousands of them had come to Padre Pio with the same invisible wound, a marriage or a family from which God had slowly, quietly, politely been removed. And Padre Pio, sitting in that small dark box with his wounded hands folded and his eyes closed and his extraordinary supernatural gift fully engaged, would listen, and then he would find the exact place where the crack had started, and he would press on it, not to hurt, to heal, because that is what a surgeon does, and that is what Padre Pio was for 50 years in that confessional. Not a preacher delivering opinions, not a moralist scoring points, a surgeon who had seen the same wound so many times that he could diagnose it before the patient finished speaking, and who had watched enough recoveries to know that every single one of them started with the same thing. One family, one evening, 2 people kneeling together, 5 minutes, 1 Our Father, 1 Hail Mary. That was his prescription, not because it was complicated, because the wound was never complicated. The wound was always the same, and the cure, real, documented, repeated across 50 years of pastoral evidence, was always the same too. In 1971, 3 years after Padre Pio's death, the pastoral team at San Giovanni Rotondo began systematically collecting the letters and testimonies of people who had encountered him. Among those testimonies was one submitted by a man from Foggia, a city 40 kilometers from San Giovanni Rotondo. He had visited Padre Pio in 1959 with his wife, during a period when their marriage had become, in his own words, a cold war without weapons. They had not spoken honestly in over 2 years. They shared a house, a surname, and 3 children, and nothing else. He had not wanted to go. His wife had insisted. He described sitting across from Padre Pio and feeling before he said a single word that the friar was reading him like a text, not suspiciously, just completely. Padre Pio had looked at him for a moment and then said, simply, "You're hungry." The man had not understood. He said, "Hungry?" And Padre Pio had said, "Your soul is starving and you have been trying to feed it with everything except the one thing that can feed it." The man wrote in his testimony that he had driven those 40 kilometers 3 more times in the following year. Each time, Padre Pio had asked him the same question, not about his wife, not about his children, but about his prayer life. Each time, the man had made a little more progress. By 1961, he and his wife were praying the rosary together every evening after dinner. By 1962, their youngest child had made his first communion, and the family had attended Mass together every Sunday for 18 consecutive months. He wrote, "I do not know how to explain what changed. I only know that when I stopped being too proud to kneel, the house became warm again. When he stopped being too proud to kneel." Padre Pio died on September 23, 1968, at 81 years of age, at 3:25 in the morning, in his cell at the Friary of Our Lady of Grace. His last words, witnessed by the friars at his side, were Jesus and Mary. His body, when examined after death, showed that the stigmata, the wounds he had carried for 50 years, since September 20th, 1918, had disappeared completely. The skin was smooth and closed, as if they had never been there. The doctors who examined him had no explanation. He left behind no published books, no formal treatises on marriage or family theology. What he left behind was the testimony of tens of thousands of people who had sat across from him in that confessional and in the sacristy and on the pathways of San Giovanni Rotondo, and had heard him speak the truth about their lives in the quiet, direct surgical way that only comes from someone who has been shown the whole picture. The whole picture, in his telling, was always the same. The family is a small church. The couple is the living sign of God's covenant with his people. The home is either a place where heaven enters daily and shapes everything, or a place where heaven is kept at a polite distance and shapes nothing. And the difference between those two homes, the warm one and the cold one, is almost never a dramatic moment of rejection, almost never a formal decision to remove God, almost always a slow and ordinary and very human series of small surrenders. The prayer skipped once, then twice, then abandoned. The Mass attended out of obligation, then not attended at all. The crucifix on the wall, but never looked at. The grace before meals said as a mumble, then dropped entirely. Small, ordinary, invisible. Until it isn't. Until the coldness is so complete and so heavy and so old that the couple can barely remember what the warmth felt like. Until the children are grown and gone and hungry in ways they cannot name. Until someone drives 40 kilometers to a friary in the Gargano Mountains to sit in front of a man with wounds in his hands and hear him say, with complete and documented consistency across 5 decades, the exact same thing. The pipe is closed. Open the pipe. In 1999, 31 years after Padre Pio's death, the Pastoral Archives of the Casa Sollievo della Sofferenza completed a cataloging project that had been ongoing since 1973. The project identified and documented over 4,200 separate pastoral encounters with Padre Pio related specifically to marriage and family life. Letters, testimony submissions, depositions given for the beatification cause, oral accounts recorded on tape between 1969 and 1985. Of those 4,200 documented encounters, the researchers identified that in over 3,800 of them, more than 90%, Padre Pio's central pastoral advice had included some form of the same instruction. Pray together, as a couple, as a family, in the home, daily, 3,800 out of 4,200, over 50 years, one message. And here's the final detail that sits underneath everything else in this story, the detail that makes the whole picture sharper and colder and more honest than any summary can capture. Among the artifacts preserved in the Friary Museum at San Giovanni Rotondo is a letter, undated but believed by archivists to have been written sometime between 1950 and 1955. It is not signed with a full name, only initials. The letter was written by a man who had come to Padre Pio in what he described as the worst year of his life. His marriage was over in everything but name. His children feared him. He had built a successful business and an empty home. He wrote to Padre Pio to ask one question. He wrote, "Father, what did I do wrong?" Padre Pio's written response, preserved alongside the letter, is 9 words long. "You built everything except the house that lasts.